This is CRT. I'm Bambi Francisco Roizen. On today's show, another win for women's rights. Trump's latest executive order blocks men from competing in women's sports. And America is rebuilding its proverbial walls to protect its people and its values. Elon Musk's Doge team of techies, including, yes, big balls, are data geniuses helping to expose what might be the biggest government spending corruption scandal in history. And what would a Riviera of the Middle East look like? I asked Google Gemini. And finally, Trump encourages Americans to believe in God. Well, our culture is being reshaped, and religion, Judeo-Christian religion, it has something to do with it. That's because a slew of government policies enacted by President Donald Trump embrace the Judeo-Christian ethos. One of those principles is speaking the truth, even if it means hurting someone's feelings. Well, what truth am I talking about? The truth about sex and gender. You know that there are two sexes, man and woman. You know, God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created the male and female. That's Genesis 1:27. I talk a lot about that with Helen Joyce, and you can watch that episode 2, and I'll be speaking more about it in another show. And also regarding this biblical truth on a side note, if you want to learn more about the biology and the science about two genders, you should check out Reality's Last Stand. It's written by Colin Wright, and it's very well done. So I would highly recommend that. Well, anyway, back to this simple biblical truth. It is shaping this new government and our new policies that we're seeing that Donald Trump is putting forth. He just signed an executive order this week called Keeping Men Out of Women's Sports. Let's watch.
I'll sign a historic executive order to ban men from competing in women's sports. It's about time.
This is such great news for women, but as in sports in general, because think about it, for anyone who likes watching sports, I love to watch sports, but I love to watch sports because I want to be in awe of what the human body can do when a person trains really hard and manifests all those great qualities I wish I had, like strength, endurance, perseverance. And we want to watch the most gifted and talented 1% of athletes. But when a man beats a woman in sports, I mean, there's something really unentertaining about that, and deflating, and frankly, cowardly about that. For one, it feels like a man is just taking advantage of the woman. And two, the type of male talent that can beat the world's top female athletes, well, it's not rare. You know, that talent exists in our local high school, even local middle schools. Now, think about this. The fastest time for a 100-meter swim for women is 51.9 seconds. That's pretty fast. But did you know a 16-year-old boy actually did that in 47 seconds? And in basketball, I guess Deanna Nolan has the highest vertical jump at 34 inches. But yeah, you know what? Go to your high school gym and you can find high school male basketball players, the elite ones, doing that as well. And then if you look at the 100-meter dash for a woman, the top woman in the world has done that in 10.6 seconds. But that's also equivalent to a middle school boy. You know, my son is in middle school. He's 12 years old. He's a pretty good golfer. He drove a green that was almost 300 yards. But his average golf drive is 240 yards, which is actually pretty good for a 12-year-old as well. But then there's Nelly Korda. She is one of the top women golfers, and she's among the 30 biggest hitters. She drives her ball about 267 yards. That's 20 yards farther than my boy. But she's the world's best. He's 12. Okay, I'm not trying to belittle women by pointing out that elite female athletes are as good as prepubescent boys. I don't want to do that at all. I'm definitely not saying that. But what I want to say, and the reason why I bring this up, is because that everybody's already known this. We've all known this. That's why we've had Title IX. That went into effect about 50 years ago, so that girls could be elevated and girls could be recognized in their own sports category because they needed it. It's why this video of Trump surrounded by healthy female athletes of all ages is so endearing, because it captures a moment in time when women and girls breathe a long-awaited sigh of relief because this man, with the power of his pen, said, I have your back.
You know, if you'd like to gather around me, I think I'm going to be okay. Come. Secret Service is worried about them. If we have to worry about them, we have big problems. Okay, do you want to do this? Watch what I do, and then I'm going to give you some pens, okay? You ready? What a nice picture this is, huh, Governor? You ready? We'll do a good job. Wait, let me press that. I want to make this a really good signature, because this is, this is a big one, right? Oh, I think we have a 10. We have a 10.
That video speaks volumes of what manliness is. It's a stark contrast to this the video that you may have remembered from the Kamala Harris and Walz marketing video when it was about what it means to be a man. So do you remember that? Take a look.
Man, I'm a man, and I'm man enough.
I'm man enough to enjoy a barrel-proof bourbon.
Neat.
Man enough to cook my steak rare.
Man enough to deadlift 500 and braid it out of my daughter's hair.
You think I'm afraid to rebuild a carburetor? I eat carburetors for breakfast.
I ain't afraid of bears.
That's what bear hugs are for.
I'll tell you another thing I sure as shit am not afraid of. Women. I'm not afraid of women.
I'm not afraid of women.
They want to control their bodies? I say go for it.
They want to use IVF to start a family? I'm not afraid of families.
They want to be childless cat ladies? Have all the cats you want.
Woman wants to be president?
Well, I hope she has the guts to look me right in the eye and accept my full-throated endorsement.
Because I'm man enough to support women.
That video is so out of touch with what women want in men. I mean, I eat carburetors for breakfast. Like, who says that? Like, who wrote that? I mean, it's so out of touch with what defines manliness. But I guess it's not a surprise when Democrats have spent way too much time undermining what a real man is and thinking way too much about quotas and meeting genders that don't exist.
Specify that when we have a gender non-binary candidate or officer, the non-binary individual is counted as neither male nor female, and the remaining 6 offices must be gender balanced. With the results of the previous 4 elections, our elected officers are currently 2 male and 2 female. In order to be gender balanced, we must elect 1 male, 1 female, and 1 person of any gender.
Oh, so confusing. I'm so confused. Look, if you're going to just keep saying we want to support all genders, like all 300 of them or 400 of them at this point, then you're not supporting any gender at all. If you're believing in this, you're just confusing yourself and forgetting what it is to be a real man. A real man doesn't just support a woman or support women. A real man protects them. And thank goodness we have one of those real men in the White House. Now let's get to immigration. I've been reading the book of Nehemiah in the Old Testament. Now, Nehemiah is the Jewish leader who rebuilds the walls of Jerusalem around 400 BC. That's before Christ. I don't like to say before Common Era. Anyway, those walls symbolized security and protection. And in Nehemiah 3, there's a whole list of all the builders of that wall. And to be honest, it's a real boring chapter because it's just a list of names. But why was there an entire book or entire chapter just of the builders? You have to wonder. Well, you can ask yourself, what creates community and unity? Well, doing something together, that does create community, valuing a place, a home, a country. The importance of listing all these people, there's about 43 different groups or persons who are listed in Nehemiah 3. And oh, by the way, they ranged from priests to politicians to perfume makers to temple servants. All of them were united. They were all united to protect Jerusalem, their home, their land, their values, their culture. And in Acts 17, we're also reminded that God established nations and their boundaries. So why am I bringing this up? Well, I bring this up because, well, God wants us to have nations, and he wants us to keep our nations safe with, yes, walls. Well, those proverbial walls are getting stronger. Newly confirmed Attorney General Pam Bondi just cut off all federal aid to sanctuary cities that are essentially ignoring the federal government in its effort to deport the many millions of illegal immigrants trying to break down our walls. Bondi's order follows the termination of the temporary protection status for 300,000 Venezuelans and the shutdown of the CPB app. That was the app that allowed nearly 1 million migrants to come into the US during 2023 and 2024. Now, many people are upset with what they consider are harsh policies. Earlier this week, protesters took to the streets. They blocked sections of major freeways in LA. They also burned the American flag. And they waved flags that said no one is illegal on stolen land. Of course, that person is clearly ignorant of history because she doesn't understand how nations have been forming for the existence of humanity. And I wonder if she would be okay if someone broke into her house and said, "Oh, I'm not illegally in your house because all of this is stolen land. So this is communal property. So where's your fridge?" Now, there's so much more to say here, but for those who are saying, these actions are some part of a right-wing conservative hate movement against immigrants, well, let me remind everyone, this is a bipartisan problem. I mean, watch PBS and its take on this.
In much the same way it began, with headlines about a migrant crisis on the U.S. southern border. Border Patrol agents encountering a record number of people entering the country, a caravan heading toward the border, and American cities struggling to keep up with asylum seekers. As Stephanie Sy reports, it's with that backdrop that President Biden dispatched 3 top advisors to Mexico in search of solutions.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken arrived in Mexico City today, greeted by U.S. Ambassador Ken Salazar. Blinken, along with Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas and other top U.S. officials, met with Mexico's president on their second visit since October to address the migrant crisis. The U.S. is asking López Obrador to make it harder for migrants to move through Mexico and to do more to stop migrants when they try to enter Mexico from Guatemala. In exchange, Mexico wants the U.S. to commit more aid to the migrants' countries of origin and ease sanctions on Venezuela and Cuba. The talks come as record numbers of people try to enter the U.S. from the southern border. At times last week, Customs and Border Protection stopped more than 10,000 people a day, adding to the more than 240,000 migrants that officials encountered in November.
Wow, more than 10,000 a day. If you heard that, I think we're down to like maybe a few hundred now with Trump in office. But clearly, this report acknowledged that there's a record number of migrants flooding the country. Border security guards were being stretched. And it's been a humanitarian crisis because it's just way too many people. I mean, if you look at this graph, you can see in the last 4 years under Biden, the number of foreign-born people in the US dramatically went up by 6 million people. And then take this other graph here from US Customs and Border Patrol. There were 10 million encounters during the Biden administration. And now that's maybe the same person trying to come in, making several attempts. But clearly there's a reason they're making that attempt. They're taking that risk because the border is porous. It's not secure. Now, some of you may be saying, wait, I'm on board with this. I don't care. Let them come in as we can all, if we can all chip in and pay for them. Well, that's easier said than done. The majority of Americans think taxes are already too high. It's hard to believe many people would be willing to stretch. So you say, well, okay, let the rich people, let them do it. They don't pay enough. They never pay enough. Well, let me ask you, how much do you want them to pay? 100% of the taxes? Because by the way, the top 10% already pay 75% of the taxes. But this is an aside. Trump, by the way, announced a tax on the rich. Yep, he's trying to close the carried interest loophole. And I'll talk about that later, but let me just tell you, venture capitalists and private equity, they're probably not too happy with that tax the rich policy that Trump is trying to push forward. Anyway, that's an aside. Now, another reason you may want to defend open borders is because you're saying, I don't want to be racist. I don't want people to think I'm racist against immigrants, immigration and non-whites. Well, guess what? Trump won 43% of the overall Latino vote in 2024. That's 8 points higher than 2020. And 48% of Latino men, they voted for Trump. Many of them voted for Trump because they like law and order. Watch.
To 15 million illegal entries into the country. No other nation has ever done that. And you would assume Latinos are in favor of open borders. Guess what? We're not. And we proved it that we're not. We want people to come here legally. By the way, we believe immigrants are a super blessing because we're immigrants. So we love immigration, but we want them to come here legally.
Yeah. And let's be practical. I think we can all agree that 1, Donald Trump was voted in as president, and number 2, immigration was in the top 3 of problems voters wanted him to fix. This poll was conducted last year, and 54% of Republicans said securing the border was the number 1 problem. And in another survey, voters in 7 swing states, Arizona, Georgia, Pennsylvania, 3 out of every 4 people said immigration policies were heading the wrong way. Many of us are immigrants. I'm an immigrant. I started a company, and by the time we had 6 people, none of us, including myself, were born in the US. We were a startup founded by immigrants, and we were proud of it. My family emigrated here. I came when I was 4 years old, and all 5 of us, I remember living in this tiny studio. And we did that because we wanted a better life. We wanted to pursue the American dream. But we came legally and orderly. But, the chaos that we've been watching, that's not orderly. It's havoc. I mean, it's dangerous for everyone. And the implications of this disorderly entry are confusion, disarray, violence. We've had drugs, human trafficking, murder. It's also sad because some of those people, they really truly are seeking asylum, and we don't know who they are. They're the ones who are getting hurt by these open border policies. So something had to be done. Someone had to close the door and fortify our walls. That is compassion. That is showing mercy for the people in our country. Taking care of the people in this nation, that's an obligation and priority, much like taking care of people in a household. You know, a nation is like a household, which and has to protect the people in that house, to protect the values and the cultures of that household. In my household, I have a lot of rules, and a lot of people don't like my rules, but you know what? They're my rules. My rules are typically around order because I want to maintain the values that unite my family. So I bet you're wondering what those rules are. I'll just tell you really quickly. Rule number 1, no shoes. Yep. If you need to wear shoes, I know some people really don't want to expose their socks, fine. I have 4 drawers of slippers. You can put on some slippers. But if you don't want to take off your shoes, then you don't have to come to my house. Rule number 2, and this is mainly for my kids, well, they have to make their beds when they wake up. Rule number 3 is, and this is for my kids and their friends, or my nieces and nephews, because we just have a lot of people coming through our house. I really love having people over, but when they do come over and sleep over, I want to make sure that they put their dishes in the dishwasher, and when they leave, they pull their sheets, because I'm all about contributing to the household, right? I mean, you want to be part of the household, you want to be my guest, then you have to respect my rules. You have to contribute, especially if you're staying for several days and weeks at a time. So when you come into the United States, guess what? You also have to contribute. You also have to chip in and fortify the wall that protects the values and traditions and the culture and the rules that unite us and that make this country the shining city upon a hill. Well, there's no American dream if we can't manage government spending. USAID, the controversial 60-year-old government agency that handles so-called humanitarian aid around the world, well, it's seen its workforce slash from 10,000 employees down to under 300. This comes after Elon Musk and his team were given access to the Treasury's payment system to identify waste and fraud in government spending. And USAID is one of the agencies quickly flagged as the most rotten or corrupt at its core. It's like a shell company for left-wing projects paid for by US taxpayer dollars. Let's take a look at some of the findings. Well, there's been spending on a transgender opera and a transgender comic book, a DEI musical, canals for heroin production. Apparently, the government has also been buying overpriced data from news site Politico, somewhere around $8 to $16 million. The government is also spending money on the spread of atheism. What happened to the separation of church and state? We should know what the government is spending on, but most Democrats are freaking out over this transparency, and they're proving they care very little about our taxpayer dollars. Watch.
We don't know who these young people are. We've got their names, some of them in Wire. What if there's someone that they just haven't a beef with? Right. And they say, now I've got their data. I know where they live. I know their social security number. I've got their banking information. They have people's tax returns.
So this is the moment when we really start rallying the troops. People tell the stories. They do not want their personal data exposed to some unelected billionaire and a handful of people that he has picked out.
This dude is probably one of the most unintelligent billionaires I have ever met or seen or witnessed.
We have to fight this in the courts. We have to fight this in the Congress. We have to fight this in the streets. Stop the coup. Stop the grift. Stop Elon Musk. Shut down the city. We are at war. Anytime a person can pay $250 million into a campaign and they be given full access to the Department of Treasury, we are at war. We have convened here in the right place
Treasury Department. We have got to tell Elon Musk, nobody elected you.
Did anybody vote for a government of billionaires for billionaires? Are you ready to stand up and defend our democracy? What we're in the face of right now is an authoritarian takeover of our country, and we say hell no.
The fact that they're fighting against exposing government spending and the fact that they have nothing to say but ad hominems just shows they stand for nothing. The fact that Musk wasn't elected is a straw man argument because no elected official is going to comb through line by line that massive general ledger. Elected officials like Trump, like Marco Rubio, who now oversees US aid, and the Treasury Secretary, well, these elected officials will hire an A-list tech team, and they found them. So the insinuation that Musk is not sophisticated or responsible enough to handle sensitive technology and data, well, it's laughable and shows the vacuousness of their complaints.
Now what they're trying to do is essentially, be the genius bar for the country right now. We're going to fix all your systems. Now, a lot of our IT systems need fixing, but they need to be done legally and safely. One of the big dangers is hacking and by foreign governments, et cetera. But you've got a private citizen who was not elected with his fingers in the IT system of this government.
It's funny that Democrats typically say young people are smart enough to change their gender at 6 years old. But at 20, we're supposed to see them as immature, incompetent, and stupid. I've learned not to underestimate teenagers and young adults. This happened when I met Mark Zuckerberg, who was about 19 years old at the time, when he dropped out of college. Watch.
San Francisco Market Watch will move over Google. There's another verb in town. College students across the country are, quote, Facebooking their classmates to connect with them or just get more information about them. The Facebook was launched in February 2004 as a student directory. Today, the Facebook has nearly 5 million users across 1,500 campuses. Joining me to talk about the fast-growing company is the founder and CEO, Mark Zuckerberg. Mark, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Mark, this is such a fast-growing company. Can you tell us what was the biggest factor behind the success? Was it a strategic decision you made, or was it you were just lucky?
Well, I think it's probably a little bit of both, but I think that some decisions that we made early on to localize the website and keep it separate for each college on the network kept it really useful because people could only see people from their local college and friends outside. Mm-hmm. That made it so people were comfortable sharing information that they probably wouldn't otherwise, which made it useful in the long term for people to look up information about other people on the site.
Notice how Mark's shirt said, "My mom thinks I'm cool." Well, he was a kid, a brilliant one with a kid humor. Another young kid about the same age as Mark was back then in that video. Well, this kid calls himself Big Balls. Brilliant kid with clearly a sense of humor. He is Edward Corstein. He is 19 years old. He's worked at Musk's Neuralink at 16. He managed dozens of web domains, and he has a hacker background. I mean, what's not to love about this kid? Hollywood makes movies about guys like this. He's a guy who knows how to sift through the data. And that's the type of guy we need to sift through all of this government data. In fact, here are what I call Doge's tech Avengers. Here they are. Here's Gavin Kleiger. He's 25 years old. He's worked at AI company Databricks. Then there's Luke Ferreter. He is 23 years old. He won a $700,000 prize for using AI to help decipher an ancient scroll from Pompeii. I mean, okay, yeah, he's an idiot. And then there's Akash Boba. He's 22 years old. He worked at a hedge fund and Meta and Palantir. Then there's Gautier Cole Killian. He has a bachelor's of science in math and computer science, studying decentralized autonomous organizations. Then there's Ethan Chautrin, 22 years old. He went to Harvard and he founded Energize AI, He received a 100,000 grant, or his company received a 100,000 grant from OpenAI. Yeah, these kids are dumb. Not. I mean, these kids should inspire all of us. I'll tell you, if as soon as I show my 12-year-old son, as soon as I show him the story about big balls, he is going to be all over that and just say, I want to be like him. I want to be smart and studious and do something for my country. So I applaud these kids. Very well done. Well, Donald Trump says he wants to make Gaza the Riviera of the Middle East. It's easy for people to scoff and say that is absurd and it will displace many people living in Gaza. But here's the thing. Take a look at this image, courtesy Google's Gemini image creator. This is what Gaza could look like. This fantasy of Gaza as destination, I don't know, it actually gives us a vision of what this city could be. And it could attract potential investment and involvement to clean it up for those who live there and, yes, those who don't live there. You know, this vision actually gives Palestinians a choice. Do you want to live in the rubble, or do you want help cleaning it up? I take the latter option. Finally, Donald Trump embraces Christianity at the prayer breakfast. Let's watch.
From the earliest days of our republic, faith in God has always been the ultimate source of the strength that beats in the hearts of our nation. We have to bring religion back. We have to bring it back much stronger. It's one of the biggest problems that we've had over the last fairly long period of time. We have to bring it back. None of us knows exactly when our time on earth will be over. You never know. A truth I confronted a few short months ago when there was an incident that it was not fun. It was not a good thing. But God was watching me. It changed something in me. I feel even stronger. I believed in God, but I feel much more strongly about it. Something happened. So thank you.
Then Trump got very real about how difficult it is to find common ground with people who have a different version of truth, but that you can't split the baby in half. When we're dealing with truth that defines our values, what is good, what is evil, both sides can't be right.
With somebody yesterday who was so upset that the bill was signed where men cannot participate in women's sports. And I said, he's a very smart guy, went to a great school, was a great student, and he actually feels, that should happen. Men should be able to play, meaning transition into women's sports. And you talk to him and it says, I don't understand it. I don't understand how the problem ever got started in the first place. It just seems so simple. But he's a good person and just believes it. He just believes it. Not going to be easy to convince him otherwise. So where is the middle ground?
And Trump wraps it up by encouraging people to bring back God into their lives.
God bless everybody. We want to come together, and the happiest, the person, the element, the everything that's going to be happy. People of religion are going to be happy again. And I really believe you can't be happy without religion, without that belief. I really believe it. I just don't see how you can be. So let's bring religion back. Let's bring God back into our lives. Thank you all very much.
I think God is back in many of our lives. I think God is on the side of conservatives. But I also know we can easily delude ourselves into thinking, well, we'll keep winning because we know what God wants. Well, sometimes we don't know what God wants, especially if we're not close to God. So we shouldn't just be bringing God back into our lives. We need to make God first in our lives. Well, joining me now is Lincoln Cannon. Lincoln writes about technological evolution and post-secular religion. He also sees religion as a powerful social technology that he envisions will, I don't know, empower humanity to attain unprecedented magnitudes of intelligence. Okay. Lincoln, welcome to CRT.
Thank you, Bambi. Happy to be here.
I like to talk to people who want to talk about religion and technology. But I have to say that some of the stuff that I'm reading on your website, I'm not familiar with. So you're going to have to just explain what some of this stuff is. I'm going to start with Mormon transhumanism.
Yeah.
What is that?
Well, to understand Mormon transhumanism, it helps to understand Mormonism and transhumanism, of course. Mormonism is a religion in the Judeo-Christian tradition. Mormons revere the Bible, as all Christians do. And Mormons also revere additional books of scripture, including the Book of Mormon, which many people have heard about. So there are some theological, doctrinal differences between Mormons and other Christians that, you could explore, and those distinctions are very important for some Mormons and for some Christians. But basically, that's what Mormonism is. It's a Christian religion in the Judeo-Christian tradition.
Can you
Transhumanism.
Just tell us a little bit, because I haven't really studied Mormonism much, but I think it's Joseph Campbell, right?
Joseph Smith.
Joseph Smith. Okay,
Correct.
So Joseph Smith. And so he came in. By the way, I'm watching American Primeval. I don't know if you're watching.
I have not.
They do not cast a good light on Mormons, by the way.
I'm sorry.
They're fighting against the Indians. And he's, I guess that's Joseph Smith. He's taking over Utah.
Oh, Brigham Young, I think, is depicted in that. I think I've heard.
Brigham Young. Okay, yeah. So then, so what is? Yeah, he's the governor, I guess, in Utah. So what? So just tell me the differences.
The differences between
Mormonism and said Judeo-Christian. It is part of it, but there's a little bit of a difference, right? I'm a Christian.
Yeah.
I would consider myself a Mormon.
So there are distinctions, of course, between all Christian groups, the Protestants and Catholics, Orthodox and Catholic, etc. Baptists, Presbyterians. Mormonism, some of its unique emphases include the possibility of multiple scriptures, not just the Bible, but that God speaks to all people at all times in all places, and those people can record those interactions with God and use them as scripture, as the New Testament writers did, or as the writers of the Hebrew Bible did. That's one important distinction. Another important distinction is in our theology, we emphasize something that's present in other Christian theologies, but generally not emphasized, or in some cases even marginalized. And that is the doctrine of theosis, or some people call it apotheosis, or deification is another word for it, or divinization is what the Catholics call it. Basically, it's the idea that humanity can and should become like God. And Mormons tend to emphasize that doctrine. We call it exaltation, is the term we use for it in Mormonism. Okay. Some other important differences exist, but those are two examples.
Okay. And then you were going to, because we were trying to figure out I'm trying to figure out what Mormon transhumanism is. So now you're going to tell me what transhumanism is.
Yeah, transhumanism is a definition that I like, is advocacy for the ethical use of technology to enhance human abilities. And I'd call attention in particular to two of the words in that definition. One is advocacy. Lots of people favor or engage in the ethical use of technology to extend human abilities, but until you're engaged in the advocacy, you're probably not actually a transhumanist. It's an ism, right? An ideology. It's something people expound and advocate. The second word I'd call attention to is ethical. It's not just technological cheerleading for human enhancement, but it's consideration of both the risks and the opportunities. To pursue the opportunities, of course, but also to mitigate the risks along the way, recognition that both are at play and both are important. So a transhumanist will advocate that we navigate those risks, mitigating them, pursuing the opportunities with the eye on enhancing human capacities such as intelligence, and then oftentimes, of course, things that are Particularly salient to transhumanists might be in the enhancement of creativity or compassion, things along those lines as well. So not just superficial characteristics, but more, even deeper, more maybe virtue-oriented characteristics as well.
So tell me how you got so fascinated with this. I mean, I see that your background, you worked at ancestry.com, you worked at some tech companies, but you also went to Brigham Young, it looks like. So, but tell me a little bit about your journey.
Sure. I was raised in a Mormon household. Both of my parents were Mormon, my mother a convert from Catholicism, and my father a lifelong Mormon. So, I did the typical things that Mormons do. At age 8, I was baptized. And then at age 12, I was ordained to the priesthood, which is very typical for all young Mormon boys, young adults. And then I served a missionary as a Mormon missionary for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which is the largest Mormon denomination, when I was 19 years old. And people, of course, often see Mormons depicted in films as missionaries with the white shirts and ties and, the name tags. That's what I did. I did that in France. After my mission, I had a crisis of belief. It had been coming on for quite a few years, actually. I was a pretty analytical, critical thinking child and young adult, teenager. And it kind of reached a crisis at the death of my father from his third cancer when I was a young adult. He died. And I just could no longer believe that God existed for very common reasons, related to the problem of evil and such. So the reasons for my disbelief were not unique, but perhaps my approach to that disbelief was a little bit different. While I was working through that disbelief, I did a lot of study in a lot of different venues, among them including philosophy. That was actually my major at university. And also, I wanted to go back and look at the Bible with different eyes, new eyes, and look at why was the New Testament so influential from a merely functional perspective, not from a believer's perspective, but why did this text have more influence than any other text in human history on human civilization? So I wanted to go back and look at it that way. And a few influences, Paul in the New Testament in unexpected ways, some philosophers such as William James, the pragmatist, Friedrich Nietzsche, the existentialist, those kind of culminated in some changes in me that I didn't anticipate. And also along the way, I ran into some texts, which at the time I didn't know were associated with transhumanists, but I would later discover were associated with transhumanists, that would influence my thinking quite a bit as well. Those things and various aesthetic sensibilities kind of converged. And over a period of 5 to 10 years, my disbelief transformed into belief, in some ways similar to what I had as a child, but in some ways different as well. At the end of that period of time, I was a believer again, but major contributors to my change included transhumanism and ideas from transhumanists. And I found that those ideas helped rekindle in me belief. And the ways in which that rekindled belief for me were useful to other people as well, I found. So I was talking about them with lots of other people, especially other Mormons who had gone through similar crises of belief, and found that those ideas were really helpful for them. And one of the reasons for that is that Mormonism has some compatibilities with transhumanism that are stronger than most other religions, most other Christian sects. One of those is that Mormonism is a very physicalist or materialist ontology. In Mormonism, there's no such thing as immaterial beings. Even God is embodied in Mormonism. Spirit is matter in Mormonism. And that lends Mormon theology to kind of a scientific worldview. In Mormonism, the things that exist are all subject to investigation and experimentation and empiricism, much like we assume things to be in the scientific worldview. So that was one commonality. Another commonality, of course, in Mormonism, I mentioned that in our theology, we emphasize theosis, the idea that humanity can and should become like God. And in particular, in Mormonism, we say that we should do that in a way following the example of Jesus Christ. And in transhumanism, there is this idea that we should, that we have the potential to become superhuman, that humanity has this potential, and that one of the major mechanisms for that is technology, that technological evolution will adapt our bodies and our brains and our communities, our relationships, and even our world toward superhuman potential. And there were a lot of synergies between this idea in Mormonism that humanity should become like God, and the idea in transhumanism that humanity has the potential to become superhuman. Then, there are various other really interesting similarities as well. And among transhumanists, there's an idea that receives a lot of attention called the simulation argument that has implications that are quite consistent with Mormon anticipations about the future, our creative potential when we become more like God. The idea is that God is a creator, and our potential as children of God is to become creators like God. So if God has created worlds, that's something that humanity should aspire to do as well, is to gain the capacity to create worlds. The simulation argument provides kind of a logical and techno-scientific basis on which to aspire to such things. So that's an example, and there's other examples that I could call attention to where there are strong compatibilities between transhumanist and Mormon worldviews. But the consequence of this basically was that it helped me see through some challenges to my disbeliefs, transhumanism did, and rekindle my interest in them. So that, along with other influences, kind of brought me back into a more positive relationship with the belief system that I had inherited.
So I want to talk about theosis. When you say that's sort of when humanity can become gods. Are there people who have become gods, or are we on sort of this trajectory to still achieve that? Do we have to all work together so everyone can become God? Or, so many people have passed away. So have some of those people achieved that status?
Yeah, so there's lots of perspectives on this in different faiths. In the Mormon tradition, the idea is that God became God, grace by grace, step by step, and that we should emulate that process. So yes, the idea in Mormon theology is that it has happened before and it can happen again, that we are the children of God and have the same potential that God has. Other traditions will interpret that doctrine differently. Secular people who aspire to superhumanity are very often atheists, so they don't think that kind of thing has happened in the past, that it's more of a potential future thing for them. But from a Mormon perspective, the idea is that we are children of God, that has happened before, and that in practice we should be working towards having it happen again. And that's not, for Mormons, of course, just increasing in intelligence, although that's important. It's also emulating the virtues that we associate with godhood, which would be compassion and courage and creativity, things along those lines.
So wait, so you were saying we were children of God, and so we try to strive to become children of God, and when we are children of God, that we're gods ourselves. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, the Mormon perspective is that all of humanity, we are all children of God right
Okay,
now.
we are, yeah, okay, we're all
And that
children.
as children of God, we should be working together. And this is not just an individual thing. We should be working together as a community to become more as God is, and that is the purpose and goal of life. In fact, Mormon scripture has a passage that says that the work and glory of God is to bring about the immortality and eternal life of humanity. And Mormons understand the eternal life of humanity to mean our capacity to become as God is, as all children have capacity to become like their parents.
Got it. And when we talk about technology as part of transhumanism, sort of using technology to enhance our, I don't know, ability to become gods, what kind of technologies are we talking about?
Yeah, that can be a lot of different things. lots of transhumanists are interested in life extending technologies, health span extending technologies, which would be quite consistent with various scriptures that talk about a future in which humanity no longer dies of aging. The New Testament talks about a time when humanity will be, as Paul describes it in the book of Corinthians, changed in the twinkling of an eye from mortality to immortality. Other potential futuristic applications of technology would be using information gathered about the dead to raise them from the dead, and that would be consistent with Christian eschatology as well. Jesus commands his disciples to raise the dead, and then of course in the New Testament later on we read about prophecies of the future when the dead would be resurrected. So transhumanists, whether they're religious transhumanists or secular transhumanists, some of them, various of them have embraced these ideas that we should enhance our health, perhaps getting to the point where our bodies are immune to aging, and then potentially even attempt to resuscitate the dead or create brains and bodies for our deceased loved ones, friends and family, and bring them back to life. And that there may be scientific, there might be scientific, technological means to help us do that. So it's a very naturalistic approach to these things, which is somewhat different from a more supernatural approach that probably most Christians have. But there are still commonalities in the end vision.
Yeah, I don't think I've heard of the resuscitating the brains and the bodies, but I guess, you have a lot of bodies out there that, if you can, I guess, if they're if they're
Yeah,
visible,
I wouldn't look at it so much as the idea of like using that brain and that body itself and like bringing them back, but rather think of them as databases. That dead body, that dead brain has information about the person who died still persisting in that structure of the brain or that structure of the body. That's why cryonics might be effective for that. But also all of our artifacts, our journals, pictures, videos. There's even a very speculative idea called quantum archaeology that suggests that every person who has ever lived has left something like we might describe it as ripples in time and space that sufficiently advanced technology could reach. Some artificial superintelligence or superhuman intelligence could access, that information and use it to reconstitute those bodies and bring them back to life. That's very speculative, of course. I don't have evidence that will prove possible, but it's something that some transhumanists talk about.
So do you believe that you could take the information in someone's brain, someone's body, somebody, I guess you could call it a soul, and put it in another body? Take that database and put it in something else?
So there's a number of assumptions and questions related to what is consciousness. How does our current anatomy, our brain and body, impinge on that consciousness? Is there a feedback loop between the two? Lots of questions that we would need to answer to get to a satisfactory response to your question. But my inclination is to say that in the same way that a mother creates a biological machine for her child in her womb, and that child is born, and we all attribute consciousness to that child, and that child changes dramatically from embryonic state up through childhood, teenagers to adulthood, and yet we attribute a consistent identity to that child throughout that period of time. In the same way that or not exactly the same way, but in an analogous way, we can say there may be ways to reform a brain and body in a sufficiently similar way to how that person was when they were alive, and that consciousness can enter that body in whatever way it enters a newborn baby, which we don't know for sure, but in a similar way it could enter that body, and if we do it right, in the same way that a mother's womb correctly constructs that biological machine that we call mortal bodies today, if we do it right, then we may have socially sufficient reason to say, yep, that's Lincoln, or yep, that's Bambi, even though Lincoln or Bambi may have died before.
Do transhumanists believe that people are born in the wrong bodies? And I'm talking about the whole movement in the healthcare system where they feel that some kids say that they've been born in the wrong bodies.
No, that's not a typical idea that's explored among transhumanists. I imagine some embrace that possibility and others don't. I guess my own inclination there would be to say it's probably most accurate that some people just don't feel comfortable in their bodies for whatever reason. In fact, we probably all have days when we don't feel entirely comfortable in our bodies, and we all want to be thinner, or we all want to have hair, or we all want whatever the thing of the day might be. But also over time, we might learn to become comfortable with things that we weren't comfortable with before. So I think there's a lot of complexity there. I wouldn't take a strong stand for or against being in the right body or not. It might be a person's perspective on their situation.
I just wasn't sure if that was a transhumanist thing. So a couple of things I want to talk about is sort of where do you want to see this going, or what are you doing? And then two, a lot of what we talk about in the show is we do talk about culture, we talk about religion and how that shapes culture and how that shapes governance. And so, and I'm not the only one who says that we've been in a religious war, but what are your thoughts in terms of, and I'm a Christian, so I'll just admit it. And I felt like people have been at war against me, but I like to talk to a lot of different people. So, what are your views from your perspective and your worldview? How have you seen like religion like really getting, and your religion, has it been at war? Do you see a new world now? Is it better than what it was? How have you been like dealing with the religious wars going on?
Yeah. I consider religion to be the most powerful social technology. And as such, it's not inherently good or evil. Like all technologies, it's just power on its own. It can be used for good or for evil. And we've seen that historically. There's religion and applications of religion, uses of religion, practices of religion that have done amazingly wonderful things for the world. And there are other applications of religion that have done some of the most terrible, some of the worst atrocities in human history. So, as the most powerful social technology, it behooves us to approach religion seriously and carefully and do our best to apply it ethically like we would any very powerful technology. So we, as you're doing, we should be engaging in discussion about it, deliberating on its powers, deliberating on how it's being used, how it's interacting with others, how we're allowing it to do what it does, and ways that we might be trying to restrain it from some of its worst demons. And so I think that the things you are doing, the podcasting you're doing, the explorations you're doing, are an important part of that. All of us who are exploring religion seriously, talking about how it is being used, how it could be used, how it should be used, are doing something very important to shape the future of humanity.
Do you think, I was just listening to President Trump at the prayer breakfast, and he talked a lot. Well, he was at a prayer breakfast, so of course everybody's going to talk about religion, but he was saying how we need to bring back, I don't know, I don't remember the exact words, but sort of bring back Christianity, and we need to bring God back into our lives. I mean, he really was. A lot of the things that he's doing, I think, align with my faith. So in that way, I think that his, he's really sort of starting maybe some sort of a revival in at least the Christian faith, and as a Mormon who, part of the Christian faith, we believe in the same book. Do you see that as well?
A revival? Is that your question? Do I see that?
Yeah.
Possibly, yeah. It does seem that pendulums swing in culture, and it seems like for some period of time there's been some decreasing interest in religion. Clearly, in the United States, the practice of traditional religions has been on the decline for some period of time. Maybe that has reached the end of that pendulum swing, and maybe it's starting to swing the other direction. There are some indicators that suggest that might be the case. I think that could be a good thing. I do think, though, that it's very likely that the religious expressions of the future will be somewhat different than in the past. That's always been the case, for thousands of years of human history. I don't think we should anticipate that, becoming static suddenly, that we'll all practice religion the same way. So there may be a revival coming. If there is a revival coming, then it will look different in important ways. And I think there will probably be many salient differences, but one salient difference that I think we will see is that at least some significant portion of religion will be very transhumanist in inclination. And that is to say, science and technology will play bigger roles than ever before in people's perspectives on religion and will inform the way that we interpret and practice our religion. And that doesn't mean that it will be a break from traditional religions, a clean break. In many cases, it will be traditional religions that have adapted to the new techno-scientific norms and context in which we find ourselves and start to express themselves differently than they have historically.
Well, I've asked this people before, in 00, right? When Jesus Christ was born, he totally flipped sort of the worldview on their head, right?
Yeah.
He became it. That was a social technology, right? He had a different worldview that essentially, dominated. And then in 1500, a lot of things happened between 0 and 1500, but at 1500, if you think about the Martin Luther and the printing press, all of a sudden that took off, and that started the Enlightenment period. That also started more of sort of this personalization with God. And I'm thinking that with AI, with the internet, but mainly with AI, now we are in the 21st century. Are we on the cusp of a new type of view? And sounds like you think we are, but how do we, if you were to simplify that, how would you describe it?
Yeah, I think that's very insightful. One of the examples you gave was the printing press. I don't think that present forms of governance or religion would have even been possible without technologies like the printing press. We would not have the democratic republics of the size that we enjoy them now without the printing press, radio and television, now of course the World Wide Web and other supporting technologies. It would not have been able to scale to what we now observe without those technologies. And the religious formulations and structures and institutions, organizations that we now have, likewise would not have been possible without those supporting technologies. And so now, as you point out, we have new, very powerful technologies becoming available to us. One in particular that is catching all the headlines right now for good reason is artificial intelligence. Another one that I think is very important when we're considering the future of governance and the way it plays out in both politics and religion is blockchain technologies, cryptocurrencies, decentralized finance, decentralized legal frameworks, and decentralized regulation. Those sorts of things can also play a big role in changing the possibility space and offering new ways for us to govern each other and to govern our mind children, artificial intelligence, to govern the new world that we're creating around us. And I think that that's actually super important. I think that the kind of world that we want to live in the future is going to be difficult to get to if we don't figure out how to manage the risks that we're facing presently. And one of those risks is the accumulation of power into a few hands, the creation of artificial intelligences that are backed by a single strong corporation or a single strong government. How do we navigate the challenge of these concentrations of power to get to a world beyond them where we still can enjoy our agency, that we aren't slaves to systems, to single people? And I think that we'll need technologies to support new mechanisms of governance to get there. There are some complex reasons that I would happily walk through if we had more time, but basic idea just being that we need new forms of governance to deal with these new forms of technology.
So last question, what are you working on?
Good question. So I'm both an entrepreneur and a philosopher. I have a few businesses in e-commerce and software related fields. And then on the philosophical front, I'm a founder and advisor or board member for some different religious transhumanist organizations that advocate ideas related to what you and I have been talking about today. So I'm working on a number of things across all of those areas.
Well, Lincoln, I wish you the best of luck. Thank you for this very fascinating conversation. I was not aware of Mormon transhumanism. I was definitely not transhumanism. So thank you so much for educating me on that. And I hope we can talk again, and good luck on everything that you're doing.
Thank you, Bambi. Thank you for the invitation, and good luck on your efforts to forward this conversation with people about religion.
Thanks so much. I've been speaking to Lincoln Cannon. I'm Bambi Francisco Rosen. You've been listening to the CRT podcast.